Northern Lights, a look at Minnesota books and writers, is presented by the Minnesota Center for the Book, a program of the Minnesota Humanities Commission, with funding provided by Target Stores and the Elmer L. and Eleanor J. Anderson Foundation.
Hello and welcome to Northern Lights. My name is Joe Kimball, a reporter for the Star Tribune, and I'm here today with Gareth Hiebert, who's an author who has recently published two books we're going to talk about. First is City on Seven Hills, which was published in 1999, and more recently in 2000, Oliver's Towne. Oliver's Townes, I think, right, Gary?
Yeah, that's right.
That's
yeah.
right. I'm particularly honored to be here today because I cover St. Paul as a beat, much as you did for many years, and you're, of course, the dean of St. Paul columns in my mind, and I'm very happy to, talk with you.
I'm flattered, Joe.
Yeah. The two books that we're talking about today are compilations of some of the columns that you did over the years, and obviously not all of them because you were very prolific and had thousands and thousands of columns.
Right. Well, Joe, the columns in these two books are sort of a gathering, a compilation of columns that I and the publishers decided were better than some of the others or were more representative of things that I had written about, and they wanted some variety, and so we picked out the ones that we wanted, and they did most of the picking. I mean, they are pretty sharp people, and they know exactly what they wanted, and so these are compilations of columns. First of all, St. Paul, mostly, maybe one or two Minneapolis. That's in the first book, City on Seven Hills. And then the other one is Oliver's Townes. And those are compilations of columns in communities around the Twin Cities. Some, like Northfield, New Ulm, Lindstrom, Chisago City, and Stillwater, places like that, Red Wing. And then the bulk of these stories are stories of the columns I wrote in the years when my wife and I went to Europe. Now, we went to Europe 29 times between 1964 and 1986, 1996, and so those columns are been winnowed out for the rest of the book.
Mm-hmm. Now, I just am curious, did the publisher pay for your trips, or did you go on your trips and then write the stories?
Now, you know, Joe, the thing is, they paid for one of my trips. One trip to Ireland when I joined a pilgrimage to County Burn Church near Kilkenny in Ireland to write about a monument that we dedicated to Archbishop John Ireland back in 1966. And in that case, I went by myself as a part of the tour group. Mm-hmm. The paper paid for that. But all of the other trips I paid for myself, but we deducted it from the income tax, and I got a ruling from the IRS and was very, very favorable.
Well, I got to talk to my boss about something like that.
They were, all you had to do is present all the columns that you had written, and a letter from the managing editor to the effect that they did not pay beyond my salary. My salary, of course, they paid.
Well, tell me a little bit how you got started in the business, because the books do reflect your newspaper work.
Oh yeah, well, Joe, I started working on the New Ulm Daily Journal back in 1937, when between my junior and senior years in high school, and then after my high school, I graduated in 1938. I worked on the paper in New Ulm for a year, trying to raise money so I could come to the University of Minnesota, because those were the days when the Depression was still, it was fading, but it wasn't fading as fast as it should have. So getting money together for tuition and room and board was really still quite a problem. I was very lucky, though, because I happened to meet in the summer of '39 James Russell Wiggins, who was a managing editor of the St. Paul Dispatch and Pioneer Press. And he was down at a 2nd District editorial convention giving a talk at the New Ulm Country Club, and the man I worked for knew I wanted to go to school and needed work, so he talked to him about me, and then he called up and said, bring some of your clippings of your columns out to the stories that you've written for the New Ulm paper out, because Mr. Wiggins is here and he'd like to say hello to you. So I took him out there, and Russ said, well, I'll take them home and read them, and he said, I'm going to hire 2 people to cover the state fair. And he said, that's only for a 2-week period. But he said, if I like what I read, I may call you on the phone and offer you a job for 2 weeks. So Monday afternoon, by Jove, he called me up on the phone and said, can you come to work next Monday morning?
Wow.
So, and the fair was starting that particular week. So I took the Greyhound bus, came down here, and 2 weeks went by, and I worked for Fred Heberlin, who was a city editor at that time, and they made him the bureau chief out at the fair. There were 4 of us out there. And so after the 2 weeks was over, Mr. Wiggins, it was a Saturday, and I was going in to get my check, and his secretary said, Mr. Wiggins would like to see you. So I went in, and he said, you know, Bob Eddy has been covering the university campus for us, but he's moving over to the copy desk, and so we need somebody out on the campus to cover the campus for the papers. He said, how would you like to have the job? And I said, well, I'd certainly like to try it. He said, okay, $65 a month in expenses. And I said, I'll take it.
It was pretty good then, wasn't it?
It was pretty good.
Good deal.
And Joe, so I covered the campus for 39, 40, and then in 41, of course, the war started. We began losing men off the staff to the military, and I had joined the Army Reserve, so they said they would not call me up till I finished school. And I was a junior at that time. And so I said, well, I'll take a chance on it, and they asked me to come down and work full-time on the Pioneer Press. That was a tough job, because you'd work 5 nights a week, go to school, and then have 2 days off, and then you'd have to go back to work and also go to school.
What kind of stories were you writing then?
Well, of course, when I was working on the city desk, it was just regular
whatever
news,
came up, yeah.
Obituaries, robbery, you know.
Sure.
But on the campus, you had some pretty good juicy plums. I remember one of them was Sister Elizabeth Kinney came to the Twin Cities, and she brought her system of her therapy for polio, and she just demonstrated it at the University of Minnesota hospitals, and she asked for permission to continue at the University of Minnesota. And Guy Stanton Ford, then the president of the university, and I happened to be at the Board of Regents meeting the morning that he described what she was doing. And he was very favorable. And so they said, well, how much does she want? And he said, well, she should have a little grant or some kind of a fund to carry on her work. And they said, where will she do it? And he said, well, she can do it here, but I think down at General Hospital in Minneapolis would be a good place. There is an opening there for her to work. So by Jove, they approved it that morning, and I got the scoop because I happened to be the only a reporter in the room.
Wow. So
we got it in the afternoon paper. That was on a Friday afternoon. The other story that I thought was rather interesting is in 1942, Alfred O. Neer, Dr. Neer, isolated U-235. It's an atom, and that was what paved the way for the atomic bomb. And one Saturday night, I got the city editor, Bill Greer at the time, threw a dispatch across the desk to me. He said, you're a university correspondent. Call this guy up and see what it's all about. And Howard Blakesley, who was then the science writer for the AP, had written quite a story about it. So I called Alfred O. Neer up, and I was scared to death, you know. These scientists always bugged me a little bit. Well, he was really nice, and he said, did you ever take physics? And I said, yes, but I didn't do very well at it. Well, he said, it would have been nice if you had, but he said, I think we can circumvent that. He said, I can't tell you on the phone tonight what I did, and I can't tell you the prospects of the future, but he said, we're having a physics picnic out at Como Park tomorrow, and that was Sunday. Why don't you come out to the picnic, and you and I can sit down somewhere, and I can try to explain what I did. So I did. I took the Como Harriet streetcar out there, you know, and he was very nice. He explained as much as he thought I could understand. And so I wrote a story. I thought that was really a real one of the big international historic stories that he had done. Now, at that time, Joe, nobody knew about the atomic bomb, but that was what they did in the, and they used that his developments to further the development of the atomic bomb.
Wow. Well, let's jump ahead a little bit
Okay.
to when you started your columns.
1954.
And you were working as a reporter, and just tell me quickly how they selected you. Did you apply for it? Did you want to do it? Or did they make you do it?
No, we used to have a columnist called Hoff and Hoff, P.J. Hofstrom. He was a weatherman on KSTP TV, and he wrote funny cartoons with stories, little stories, but not human interest, mostly humor stories and puns, and he did sketches in his column. Took a job at WBBM in Chicago as a weatherman, and so there was a vacancy, and Doug Fairbanks, we call him Doug, was Vernon Fairbanks, was a managing editor, came in, and he said, we're going to have a competition here for among you guys. You write a column, each one of you write a column, we'll pay you $10 if we use it, and then we'll make some decisions about who is going to get the job. So he said, we do need another columnist, so we all wrote to beat the band, and we all got $10. We were, I think I made $50 one month there, in addition to my salary, which was pretty good. Well, one afternoon he came out to the city desk and he said to Bill Gurr, I think we found our columnist. Bill said, who is it? And he said, I suppose they're going to take another guy away from me on the desk. And I said, I think I am. And he said, Gary Hiebert, I'm going to offer him the job.
Wow.
So he did. And I wasn't really too enthusiastic about it, Joe. And I said, now, Doug, if I can't measure up to the standards that you're looking for, he said, if you want to stop, you can. We're not going to push it. And you can go back to the city desk if you feel that you don't, this isn't your cup of tea.
Well, for 32 years, you drank
So
that
I
cup
said,
pretty well.
Yeah, I said, okay, I'll try it.
Now, when 32 years. When I interviewed you a while ago for a story in our paper, you were telling me just, I think the day before, you were walking across Rice Park or someone, and someone yelled out, "Hey, Oliver!" And let's explain about that, how the column got its name.
Oliver Towne.
Right.
Yeah.
And some people think that's you.
Well, they still think that's me.
that, yeah.
Harold Shugart was a general manager of the paper, and he was a punster. And when Fairbanks told him he had a new columnist, and Harold said, what are you going to call the column? And Fairbanks said, I don't know. And he said, why don't you call it the Oliver Towne column? And Fairbanks says, how does that wash with the rest of the people here in the newsroom? And he went around and asked if they thought it was pretty good. Thought it was sort of funny.
Yeah.
But anyway, I got stuck with it, and I've been stuck with it ever since. I get on the 21A bus now, you know, to go from downtown St. Paul up to the cathedral, where I park my car, and people sit across and they say, that's Oliver Towne.
So, and you've gotten used to that, obviously,
yeah, I got
after
used
all
to
these
it.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, over the years, you wrote about probably every place and every person of interest, and maybe some who were a little unsavory over the years.
Oh, yes.
Tell me, Tiger Jack, you wrote a lot
Tiger Jack
about.
Rosenblum, but one of my incomparable man on the street.
Yep.
Tiger Jack claims to be the last of the lost tribe of Moses. And Tiger Jack is African American, but he said that they were the real lost tribe that Moses was leading out of Egypt. And so he had this little shack, and he made a lot of money on that little shack. He sold everything, charcoal, all kinds of records, wood, corn on the cob, tomatoes when they were in style.
Yeah, he was quite
and,
the guy.
He put, I think, 4 or 5 children through college.
Wow.
With that little shack.
Yeah.
And he used to always say, he said, Mr. Oliver, Mr. Oliver, he said, I'm just having a wonderful time. And he said, I'm so glad you come up here and talk to me. He said, Tiger Jack likes to talk to people. And by Jove, we had a lot of fun. Tiger Jack and I were great friends.
Yeah, he liked to talk to people, and so did you, I think.
Oh, yeah, we sit there, and cars would drive up, and there'd be a limousine, and he'd say, go out and see what they want. I'd go out, and they'd say, we need a sack of coal, and I'd give them a jar. They didn't know who I was.
Oh, funny. One of the columns in the book is the Norski Torski Club. They're still around, I think.
Oh, you bet they are, yeah, the Norski Torski Club.
That,
and I gave a speech there. When I wrote about it, I gave a speech simultaneously with writing about it. And the day I went out to give the speech, I discovered that 90% of the members of the Norski Torski Club were Irish, German, or Swedish.
So a misnamed club a little bit there.
Yeah, they weren't. Norsemen were hard to find.
Yeah. Do you have some favorite places in St. Paul that you loved back then and you still like to go see or be around?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite places, of course, was the City Hall and the Union Depot. Now I'm a great train lover, and I used to, when I was working on the paper before I took the column, I wrote a lot of stories about railroad trains, and I used to go down to the depot on Friday night once in a while when I was working on the desk and have an hour or so, and then boss would say, well, we don't have much to do, why don't you just take off and go home? I'd go down there and I'd go down on the towers on either end of the depot where the train directors sat and guided the trains on the right switches into the right gates. Yeah, they do that now out at the airport. The traffic controllers do the same thing that they did down there in the Union Depot for years and years, only the airline people don't have tracks. But they guide people into the gates and out of the gates and down the runways and so on. Did the same thing down at the depot.
People tell me that in the 40s, the depot was as busy as the airport.
85 trains a day came and went.
And people milling around and busy. And
of course, World War II the depot played a great role in World War II. This is where people went to war, where they came home from war, where people came to the depot when they brought home the bodies of some of the soldiers, and they would put them in casket boxes down on the baggage cars, and the families would come into the depot. Then they would take them down to the lower level to claim their son or their father, whoever it was, their brother, and then the hearse would pull up and take them out to wherever they're going to be. So we did some of that too.
Have you been down recently now to see what they've done at the depot, what it's like these days?
Yeah, I think I'm glad that they didn't tear it down.
Right.
I like everything they've done down there almost. I like
we got the restaurants.
Yeah, they got the restaurants, and they've got the head house, which someday may be an art museum. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But at least, Joe, they did not tear it down.
Yeah.
It's a castle. It's a palace of transportation, you know.
You know, another historic building that would have been featured prominently over the years is the Landmark Center. The old post office.
But I remember when before they found the Corteil, and it was a post office.
Yes, and it was all blocked up somehow, I think.
Oh gosh, and nobody realized until Mrs. Musser got into it, and Henry Blodgett, who was on her committee, and they started digging around up there, and they found these beautiful mezzanines, you know, 4 floors worth.
So they'd actually put floors and up on each of the floors,
right,
and then now they've torn it down and it's straight up to the top.
Well, it was district court judge, federal judge Ed Devitt was very much responsible for the city to get that building for about $5.
Wow!
But they had to promise to develop it into something more than an empty building.
Yeah, yeah. Now your main mission, I think, in your books and in your columns over the years was telling us about St. Paul, about how you saw it and how the people saw it. But you also were able to travel a little bit and write about some of the cities around the Twin Cities.
Oh, yes.
I think you did Stillwater quite a bit.
I did Stillwater quite a bit, and actually I've got 3 pieces about Lindstrom, Chisago City, and Center City up there.
Did you like that area?
Well, yeah, I got up there and began writing. Somebody called me. one of my favorite stories was somebody called me up one time and says there's a 99-year-old grave digger working out in Chisago City, and I said, I don't believe it. She said, he's out there digging a grave this afternoon. So, gee, I got in the car and drove out to the cemetery. Here he was. I'm trying to, it's in this book. Walter Noreen, I think his name was. And he was 99, and I went out to the cemetery, and he was digging his grave, and we got to talking. I said, how many years have you been doing this? And he said, oh, about 40. And he said, my father was a grave digger, too, and I just sort of took the business after he left. And so it was a story that went all over the AP wire. You know, I wrote the column, and everybody thought it was just a... And I asked my doctor, I said, how has it happened that this man can get out there and dig a grave? He said he's been doing it so many years that his muscles are tuned to that particular level, and he can do it almost ad infinitum. Wow. But he lasted until, when he was 104, he retired. And I went out to interview him.
Yeah.
Then he moved to an assisted living place in Chisago City, and I interviewed him one more year, and then I didn't interview him anymore. He lived to be 108.
My goodness.
Walter Noreen, quite a guy.
Well, I'm interested now. You tell us about how you went out and talked to him these times. When you were doing a column, how much time would you spend with a person like Walter Noreen?
Well, I spent about 2-3 hours.
2 or 3 hours, and you get them to talk? You try to get them going?
Yeah, well, sometimes people didn't want to talk to you too much, and you'd had to sort of prime the pump a little bit, and you had some devices that you'd use. I know if somebody said he didn't want to be interviewed, and you know something, well, I'd say, George, that's an interesting plant there, isn't it? Do you know the name of that plant? Well, yeah, that's one of my favorite plants. He said, I planted that. I dug that up out along Lake Superior one time, put it down. I said, it's got beautiful flowers. And he said, yeah, well, I've got a couple others, he said, over here. And pretty soon I had this guy eating out of my hand, you know.
You got it. You got
and
him
he
going.
I'd say, George, you know, we ought to have a little story about those plants in your garden and everything. Well, he said, I don't know. You think you should? I said, yeah, well, let me take it and let's try what we can do. So he talked to me about, pretty soon he was telling me about how he went to Central High School or someplace like that.
And you got the whole story.
Got the whole story. But
I've found, I think, whenever we talk to someone, they've got a story. It's up to us to dig it out of them sometimes.
Yeah, that's correct.
I mean, everybody's got a good story.
That's right, Joe. And so that's the way. Those are one of the devices that you can use. But I have a lot of affection for small town Minnesota and small towns everywhere. But during my years as a columnist, I used to do Sunday features in addition to the column, and most of those were out in the state. Oh. And I ran into some wonderful towns. I remember there was a Dr. Skinner who was running a fine old doctor. He ran on the bloodmobile, went down all over Minnesota, taking blood at various towns. He called me up one day and he said, you know, I just got out of a town down on the Minnesota-Iowa border that you should write about. And I said, well, who? He said, the town's name is Greenleafton. And I said, Greenleafton? He said, it's a Dutch town of about 600 people. It's right on the Iowa-Minnesota border. And he said, I was down there, and he said, those people have the most beautiful tulip gardens that you ever saw. And he said, everybody in that town has a tulip garden. He said, everybody in that town sweeps and scrubs the sidewalks every morning, the way they do in Holland. He said, it's a perfect slice of the Netherlands. And he said, you ought to go down there and talk to these people and do a story. So I did. I drove down, and he was a good source. And I told these people, I said, Dr. Skinner suggested that I come and do the story. And it turned out really well. And beautiful pictures of tulips. They had tulips in all the boulevards and in the gardens and everything, various colors.
Nice story.
It was a good story.
How long does it take you to write a column after you've been out and talked to the person for a couple hours?
Oh, gee, it varies. Sometimes it's difficult to write. It really comes, it's like pulling teeth. Yeah. And then sometimes the thing just rolls right out.
Almost writes itself.
Well, you know what I did, Joe? on the way home from all of these interviews, I'd write it in my mind.
Uh-huh.
I try to write the story in my mind. What am I? What's the lead going to be? What do I want to focus on? You know. So when I got home, and I know, and I usually had dinner in my family, and then I wrote most of my stuff late at night on the typewriter at home, and I had an office there, and that's when all this stuff would gel. And by 1 o'clock in the morning, I had it pretty well organized down there.
Now, one of the things about working for a newspaper is that you know, it's here today and then tomorrow it's wrapping the garbage.
That's right.
But yours, because of these books, have endured. Do you think about your work, the things that you've done, as a glimpse of our lives, or as history, or looking back, what do you think of it?
Oh yes, my whole theme, Joe, was to write about the people, places, and things in my time, as how they were. For example, how was life down at the Crossways restaurant on Thursday noon when Joe Sapornik and all the other people would show up and we'd all have a gathering? And what I would do is write a portrait of that restaurant on that noon and say, 50 years from now or 100 years from now, somebody's going to pick up this column and they'll know how it was at the Crossways restaurant.
So you kept that in your mind as you were writing?
All the time, Joe.
Oh,
I figured someday somebody's going to want to read or want to remember how it was, and it's true, we have these historians and we have all of these very sober, in-depth writings, but how about the average guy on the street, the people that we all knew? I write about, for example, Tommy Gibbons, who was the great sheriff and fought...
Oh, the boxer.
The boxer.
Yes, of course.
Well, I knew him well, and
yeah.
I wrote about him. Now, somebody comes up to me and said, oh, I remember when you wrote about Tommy Gibbons. And I said, he was on the street here,
yeah.
walking down 4th Street. Right. And, you know, these are things...
Well, I think that you've helped everyone by compiling these again for us to read.
Yeah.
And we were running out of time, but I really have enjoyed chatting with you, Gary.
I have too, Joe.
And I want to thank you. And I want to thank our viewers for joining us. And this is Joe Kimball, and I'd like to say goodbye for Northern Lights.
And this is Gary Hiebert, Oliver Towne. Thank you so much.
Northern Lights, a look at Minnesota books and writers, is presented by the Minnesota Center for the Book, a program of the Minnesota Humanities Commission, with funding provided by Target Stores and the Elmer L. and Eleanor J. Anderson Foundation.